The notification appeared on a Tuesday. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that because it matters to me, even now, even after everything. I was 43 years old, sitting at the kitchen island, eating leftover pasta at 7 in the morning before my commute, and my wife's phone was face up on the counter because she'd left it there when she went upstairs to shower. She did that constantly. Left her phone everywhere, on the bathroom sink, on top of the dryer, in the cup holder of the car we shared on weekends. I never touched it. 14 years of marriage and I never once picked up her phone to look through it. I didn't think I had a reason to. Then the screen lit up. I wasn't even looking at it directly. It was peripheral. That rectangle of light in my left eye line while I was scrolling through my own phone reading about a weather delay on the Eisenhower. But the preview text was large enough. My glasses were on. And the name at the top was one I recognized. Dr. Paul Whitmore, the cardiologist who worked 2 floors above my wife's department at the hospital. The message preview said, "Last night was everything. Can't stop thinking about you." I set down my fork. The pasta was getting cold anyway. My wife is a radiologist. She's been at Northwestern Memorial for 11 years. She's good at her job, genuinely good. The kind of doctor who gets thanked in Christmas cards from patients' families. When we met, she was still in residency and I was doing structural engineering for a firm downtown. We were set up by her cousin at a birthday dinner and neither of us particularly wanted to attend. She laughed at something I said about the appetizers and I thought, there it is. That's the one. We got married when she was 31 and I was 32. No kids by choice, which people always want to comment on, but is its own story for another time. We had a good life, a real one, not the performed version you put on Instagram, but the actual kind with grocery arguments and Saturday morning habits and knowing how the other person takes their coffee without thinking about it. Or so I believed. I sat at that kitchen island for probably 4 minutes without moving. The shower was still running upstairs. I could hear the pipes in the ceiling. I had 4 minutes to decide what kind of person I was going to be for the rest of my life. And I chose the kind who doesn't flip the table before he knows how many legs it has. I went to work. I ate the pasta on the train. I didn't say a word. The thing about being an engineer is that you're trained professionally and temperamentally to verify before you act. You don't condemn a load-bearing wall because you don't like how it looks. You run the numbers, you document. You build a case that would hold up to scrutiny because the cost of being wrong is too high. I applied that logic to my marriage on a Tuesday in March. By Friday, I had confirmed what the notification suggested, and I wish I could say it surprised me more than it did. Dr. Paul Whitmore, 47 years old. Married, though apparently that detail wasn't inconveniencing either of them. He'd been at Northwestern for 6 years. My wife had mentioned him maybe twice in casual conversation. Once as that cardiologist who's always in the cafeteria at weird hours, and once in the context of a hospital fundraiser committee they were both on. Not suspicious. Not nothing. The committee. I started paying attention to the committee. She'd been staying late for committee meetings roughly twice a month for the past 8 months. I went back through my own calendar, the shared one we kept for logistics, dentist appointments, my mother's birthday dinner, the weekend trip to her sister's in Indianapolis, and there, quietly, like background noise I'd learned to ignore, committee late, don't wait up. 8 times in 8 months. I started keeping a separate note on my phone, dates, times, things I noticed. I was calm about it. Disturbingly calm, actually, which I've since come to understand is what happens when part of your brain is still trying to protect you from information it knows will cost everything. The financial piece came later, and that's what genuinely took the floor out from under me. My wife and I had a joint account for household expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, the usual infrastructure of a shared life. We each also maintained individual checking accounts, a decision we'd made early in the marriage to preserve some financial autonomy. I respected hers, never asked for statements, never questioned purchases. I trusted her the way you trust someone after 14 years of nothing suggesting you shouldn't. In April, 2 weeks after the Tuesday notification, she mentioned that her individual account was running lower than expected. and asked if we could increase the automatic transfer from joint for a couple months. I said of course. She said it was her car insurance and some professional development fees. Something in me, the engineer, the verifier, filed that away. In May, I got a call from our accountant. We do our taxes jointly, and he needed some documentation. In the course of that conversation, he mentioned, offhandedly, that her individual account had seen some unusual transaction patterns over the past year. He wasn't accusing anyone of anything. He was doing his job. But he said the number was $31,000. $31,000 over 14 months. Hotel bookings, restaurant charges, 2 weekend reservations at a property in Geneva, Illinois, a spa package, what appeared to be a custom piece of jewelry from a boutique in River North. I looked it up. The boutique and their average piece runs between $800 and $2,400. She never wore new jewelry that I noticed, which means she wore it somewhere else. I thanked my accountant. I told him everything looked fine. I drove home and sat in my parked car in the garage for 22 minutes before I went inside and made dinner and asked my wife about her day. She's a good liar. I want to acknowledge that honestly because I think it matters to the story and to my own reckoning with it. She's not a careless person. She compartmentalized with a precision I found, in retrospect, genuinely impressive in a horrible way, 14 years, and she never cracked. Or if she cracked, I wasn't looking at the right places. The committee meetings, the slightly later hours, the gradual emotional distance I'd chalked up to her being tired or stressed, or just the natural cooling that long marriages are allowed to have, none of it looked like what it was. It looked like life. I spent 6 weeks building a picture. I didn't confront her. I didn't hire anyone. I used public information, our shared accountant, and the kind of quiet attention that a person can sustain when they're running on a cold kind of focus that has replaced every other feeling. I documented the hotel charges against her calendar entries. I found the jeweler's Instagram and saw a photo she'd apparently liked in January, a necklace, gold, geometric, from her personal account, which was public because she'd never thought to make it private from her husband who never looked. The necklace cost $1,900. I also spent those 6 weeks talking to a divorce attorney. Her name is Rebecca Holt, and she is the most quietly efficient human being I've ever encountered. I told her everything I had. She told me what it was worth, legally, and what my options were, and what the difference was between what I could prove and what I knew. Those are different categories. I needed to understand that distinction clearly before I moved. There was one more thing I wanted to confirm before I did anything. I need to explain the hospital situation because it's the part of this I'm still processing, and I'm going to try to describe it accurately even though it costs something to do so. My wife sat on the committee, the genuine one. The hospital's fundraising and grants committee was Dr. Whitmore. This was real. The committee was real. But over the past year, 2 grants that Northwestern had applied for, both in the radiology department, had been quietly deprioritized in the review process, not rejected, just delayed, cycled back, the kind of administrative drift that's easy to attribute to bureaucracy if you're not looking for anything else. I am an engineer. I know what structural drift looks like. I spoke to a friend of mine who works in healthcare administration at a different institution. I didn't give him specifics. I asked theoretical questions about how grants move through hospital systems and where bottlenecks typically appear. He told me, without knowing why I was asking, that the most common point of interference is the committee that advises the review board, the group that prioritizes which applications to advance. My wife was on that committee. Dr. Whitmore chaired it. The 2 delayed grants were both in her department, and both were associated with a project led by her colleague, a woman who, according to my wife's own complaints over the last year, was difficult to work with and constantly angling for recognition. I'd heard these complaints and nodded and never thought twice. I was a structural engineer looking at a wall I'd never once questioned. I brought this to Rebecca Holt. She connected me with someone at the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation who handles complaints involving licensed medical professionals and institutional misconduct. I submitted what I had. I was told in the formal language these conversations require that the information was sufficient to open a preliminary review. I filed the divorce paperwork the following Monday. She found out about the filing before I told her. That's not how I wanted it to happen. I'd intended to sit down with her that evening, be a human being about it, not ambush her. But her attorney apparently called her within the hour of the filing, and she was home when I walked in at 5:15, and the look on her face told me she already knew. We stood in the kitchen, the same counter where her phone had been face up on a Tuesday in March, and she said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." She asked if there was any way we could talk about it. I told her I'd been talking about it internally for 3 months, and I was done. She cried. Genuinely, I think. I don't say that to be cruel, I believe the grief was real. I don't think the affair erases the 14 years or the original feelings, and I don't need it to. I'm not trying to retroactively turn the whole marriage into a lie, because that would make my own life a lie, and I'm too old for that kind of revision. But she also, in the middle of crying, said, "Paul and I, it wasn't, it wasn't serious. It was just something that happened, and I didn't know how to stop it." 14 months, $31,000. A necklace she wore somewhere I'd never seen. I didn't say any of that out loud. I said, "I understand. I'll be at my brother's." My brother lives in Evanston. He has a guest room that smells like dog because he has 2 large dogs, and I slept in that room for 3 weeks and found it, genuinely, one of the more peaceful stretches of sleep I'd had in recent memory. There's something clarifying about removing yourself from the architecture of a life that's been compromised. The guest room was just a room. No history in the walls. He didn't ask a lot of questions. That's why I went to him specifically. We'd sit at his kitchen table in the mornings with coffee, and he'd talk about his kids, his job, the dog's various ailments, and occasionally he'd look at me and say, "You all right?" And I'd say, "Getting there." And that was enough. My wife called 11 times in the first week. I answered twice. Once to clarify a logistical question about the mortgage, and once because it was late and I was worried about something unrelated. The second call, she asked again if we could try counseling, and I said I'd already tried counseling for 3 months inside my own head, and I'd reached a conclusion. She texted less after that. The regulatory review concluded 3 months later. I won't describe the outcome in detail because parts of it are still in a process that I've been advised to keep quiet about. What I'll say is that Dr. Whitmore voluntarily stepped down from his committee chair position in June, citing personal reasons. 2 of his colleagues requested an internal audit of grant prioritization decisions going back 18 months. The 2 delayed grants in my wife's department were advanced for expedited review. My wife was not charged with anything. She wasn't the architect of whatever Dr. Whitmore was doing with that committee, and I never believed she was. But she knew about the delays. She'd mentioned them to me in passing, complained about them actually, in the way people complain about things they privately benefit from. She knew her colleagues' projects were stalling. She kept going to committee meetings and coming home and eating dinner with me and asking what I wanted to watch. That's the part I sit with. Not the affair itself, the affair I can locate in a recognizable human failure, the kind that happens when people are selfish and weak and tell themselves a story about what they deserve. But the professional thing, using proximity to power to slow down a colleague's work, that's a different category of person than the one I married, or at least thought I married. Maybe I was wrong from the beginning. Maybe I just hadn't put the right stresses on the structure. The divorce was finalized in October. We divided things cleanly. Rebecca Holt is very good at her job, and so, apparently, is my wife's attorney, and both of them seemed to prefer efficient over dramatic, which meant the whole process was less corrosive than I'd feared. The house sold in August. I'm in a 2-bedroom in Lincoln Park now, which is smaller than what I'm used to, but has good light in the morning, and a coffee shop 3 doors down where the people behind the counter already know what I order. That's its own small thing, being known somewhere new. I still do structural engineering. I'm good at it. I went back to the office in September after a summer of working from home, and people asked how I was, and I said fine, and they moved on, which is exactly what I needed them to do. There's a project in the West Loop I've been on for 2 years that's finally moving into the phase I actually enjoy, where you can see what the thing is going to be, where the shape of it becomes undeniable. I find that satisfying. I always have. My brother called last week and asked if I was seeing anyone. I told him it had been 4 months since the divorce was finalized, and I'd spent 14 years with the same person, and I was pretty comfortable just being quiet for a while. He said that was reasonable, Then he said one of his dogs had eaten a sock and needed surgery, and we talked about that for 20 minutes instead, which was the best possible outcome. People ask me sometimes, not many people, because I haven't told many people, how I managed to stay so calm through all of it. The discovery, the documentation, the 3 months of dinners and normal evenings while I was building a case on my phone. They mean it as a compliment, I think, or maybe they mean it as a question about whether I'm okay, whether something got suppressed that shouldn't have. I don't have a clean answer. I wasn't calm in the way of someone who didn't feel it. I felt it. I still feel it, the particular loneliness of realizing that the person you trusted most was running a parallel life with enough competence that you never once caught the edge of it. That's not nothing. That doesn't go away in October when a judge signs a document. But I also think there's a difference between feeling something and being destroyed by it. I had a choice in how I responded, and I chose to respond in the way that protected what was actually mine to protect. My financial position, my professional stability, my ability to look at myself clearly and know I acted with some integrity in an undignified situation. I didn't blow up her life out of anger. I reported what I found because it was the right thing to report. I filed because the marriage was over, and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of dishonesty. The necklace. I found out afterward, through a mutual friend who didn't know enough not to mention it, that my wife had stopped wearing it shortly after I left. Gave it to a donation bin somewhere, apparently. I don't know what that means to her. I don't need to. I had coffee yesterday morning at the place downstairs. The woman behind the counter had my order ready before I reached the register. Medium drip, room for cream. She slid it across and said, usual. And I said, yeah, usual. And I took it to the window and watched the street and thought about nothing in particular for a while. That's where I am. That's enough for now. I've thought a lot about what the 6 weeks between that Tuesday morning and the day I filed actually cost me. Not financially, I know that number. Rebecca made sure I knew every figure before I signed anything. I mean the other cost, the one you pay in sleep and appetite, and the particular exhaustion of sitting across a dinner table from someone and asking about their day when you already know what their day contained. People think the hard part is finding out. It isn't. The hard part is deciding, in the immediate aftermath of finding out, what kind of person you're going to be about it. Because that decision happens fast, before you've processed anything, and it shapes everything that follows. I chose to be methodical. Some people would call that cold. I think it was the only honest option available to me. Going to her the morning I saw that notification, screaming, demanding, falling apart, wouldn't have given me truth. It would have given me her version of truth, edited in real time, shaped by whatever she needed me to believe in that moment. I'd seen how good she was at managing information. I wasn't going to hand her the chance to manage me. What I built over those 6 weeks wasn't a weapon. I want to be clear about that. It was a record, an accurate account of what had happened, documented carefully, presented to the people whose job it was to act on it. The divorce attorney, the regulatory office, the accountant who'd flagged the numbers without knowing what they meant. I just connected the pieces that were already there. The actions were always hers. I only made sure they were seen. There's something in that worth sitting with, I think, not as a lesson handed down from somewhere above, just as an observation from inside the experience. The things we do in private are still things we did. The hotel charges don't disappear because your husband trusts you. The grants you help delay don't unstall because no one's looking. Reality keeps its own ledger, independent of whether anyone's auditing it. Dr. Whitmore found that out when the internal review opened. My wife found it out on the morning she received 2 documents instead of 1. I'm not interested in whether they suffered. That's not mine to measure. What I'm interested in is what I learned about myself, that I could absorb something genuinely devastating and still act with some integrity in the middle of it, that I could be angry without being reckless, that I could grieve something real and still function, still work, still show up to my brother's house and talk about his dog's sock surgery and mean it. That's the thing about building a life carefully, with attention and honesty. It doesn't make you immune to being hurt, but it does mean that when the structure is tested, you know which parts are actually yours. The marriage was damaged long before I found out. What I built in those 6 weeks was just the documentation of damage that already existed. I'm in Lincoln Park now. Good light in the mornings. Coffee shop that knows my order. structural project in the West Loop that's finally taking shape. That's not nothing. After everything, that's actually quite a lot.